I'll just take you through a few photographs. So the photos on the screen are the subject site. The site is made up of 2 properties. Number 30 currently contains a single dwelling. Number 32 is currently vacant with the exception of an outbuilding. These are the properties immediately to the east of the site at number 34 and 36, both single dwellings. And then immediately, that was to the west, and this is immediately to the east, so you can see the subject site over here. And then some photos of the development directly opposite the site. The site is located in the general residential zone and is effectively a development contribution plan overlay. In terms of what's being proposed, the application is for 4 double-storey and 2 single-storey dwellings. So you'll see up on the screen, this is the ground floor plan showing the front 2 dwellings having their own separate vehicle access way, and there's a central driveway which provides vehicle access to the rear 4 dwellings. The next slide shows the location of the upper levels of the front 4 dwellings. Just take you through some elevations. So that's a proposed streetscape elevation showing the development in the context of the adjoining dwellings. Then the other elevation, so the top elevation there again is a streetscape elevation, and then the next 2 are the side elevations of the development, and then the bottom one is the rear elevation of the single-storey dwellings. We received 2 objections to this application. They're marked with the black X on the map up on the screen, and there's a summary of the main issues raised in the objections up on the screen. So the appearance of the proposal, along with concerns around car parking and traffic, excess rubbish on rubbish collection days, and increased pressure on stormwater infrastructure. So the officer recommendation is that the application be supported subject to conditions, and those conditions commence at page 24 of tonight's agenda. The key conditions relate to some minor changes to improve some minor non-compliances with Res Code, as well as complying with Council's ESD policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like now to ask, are there any objectors who wish to speak to this item? Yes, please come forward.
I'm Joe Perry. As well as speaking in support of my objection to the proposed development of the 6 units at number 30 and 32 Margaret Street, I'm also doing so on behalf of Mr and Mrs D'Angelo at number 21, and also Mr Dominic Garofalo at number 19. He didn't put an objection in. He wasn't able to join us here this evening. As I've been asked to include their concerns in my address this evening, just wondering if I could have an extra minute or 2
Certainly.
To do so. Firstly, I can't begin to tell you the depth of concern residents have not only in Margaret Street but also throughout the suburb of Fawkner at this scourge of runaway overdevelopment and its impact on our street and our suburb. Being amongst the suburb's long-term residents, we understand and we can relate to the need for affordable housing. It's what brought us to Fawkner in the first place, many, many years ago. We understand and appreciate that everyone has to play their part. This requires streets with capacity being applied for additional housing. Our issue, however, is overdevelopment and the complete lack of consideration for the future long-term social, environmental and community needs of the residents. We want new residents to come into a community and a suburb with a future, not streets choked with cars, not ugly, upright, crammed together shoe boxes or unsightly dormitories. with no allowance for people-to-people engagement, cultural expression, health and so on. Greenfield suburbs receive every consideration from their councils with respect to their public realm needs, but established suburbs such as Fawkner have theirs completely ignored. With a massive windfall in stamp duty, rates, charges and taxes that go to council and government, there's been no investment and improvement to the public realm of Fawkner. Nothing for urban renewal, new parklands, additional retail, social and community spaces to address the livability needs of the suburb's increased population. Not one extra tree, not one extra inch of parkland, no additional shops, and this list goes on. In just a few short years, in Margaret Street, we've had 3 dual occupation constructions, 3 dwellings at number 20, and now a further 6 proposed for 30 and 32 Margaret Street, resulting in a nearly 30% increase in the number of dwellings in a small suburban street. Margaret Street is already being impacted by the increased population in Fawkner, with more and more cars using it as a rat run to avoid the lights at Jutes and Sydney roads. A further hazard is that many of these motorists speed down Margaret Street, endangering the residents, especially the kids and the elderly. To make matters worse, we're dealing with the impact of increased on-street parking that requires our residents to put their rubbish bins in the gutter or their driveways to ensure they're collected by council. These issues are not unique to Margaret Street, Fawkner. They've been presented to council over and over again in the past by fellow moorland ratepayers. So I'm absolutely bewildered by the inaction of council. Over 2 decades of its history, Moreland Council has been a leader on issues of social justice, the well-being of its ratepayers, environment and culture, Indigenous people, and the appreciation of cultural diversity. It's acted courageously, taking on and challenging Spring Street over the east-west freeway. But here we are today, facing the single greatest issue that has ratepayers from Brunswick to Fawkner angry at the impact of rampant, unmanaged and unregulated development. And our council, that's needed more than ever to provide courageous leadership and guidance, is sadly silent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perry. Are there any further objectors that wish to speak to this item? In that case, is there a representative of the applicant who wishes to speak? Please come forward, sir.
Thank you, Chair, councillors and officers. My name's Andrew Gray. I'm a town planning consultant. I've been asked to speak on behalf of the applicant tonight. We say that this site is a very good candidate for medium density housing for a number of reasons. One, it's a very large site. It's a combined site of 2 lots that have been combined to provide an area of almost 1,150 square metres. It's very close to Sydney Road, which is obviously a main arterial through the municipality, and a very short walk from Gowrie Station, which is very important. The other thing, it has very good orientation, has a northerly aspect, so all open space areas have either the northerly, east or west aspect, and good passive solar access. We say that this proposal will provide affordable housing for people looking to get into the housing market. It allows for more population and people to move into the area. We think that's a good thing. We say it's in a general residential zone rather than a neighbourhood residential zone, and the general residential zone does encourage medium density housing, respects character. And we say this proposal does respect character, and we say that for a number of reasons. It does provide for significant landscaping on site. The front setback and the width of the frontage at 30 metres provides for good landscaping opportunities in the front setback. The scale of 2 storeys is appropriate, and also steps down to a single storey scale at the rear in accordance with council's policies. We say the building form reflects the existing character of the area. The buildings, the proposal has a very high level of compliance with Res Code, and there's only minor matters noted in the officer's report that require to be addressed. In terms of car parking, it provides full compliance with car parking. Council's traffic engineers are satisfied with the car parking provision, and also in terms of the traffic volumes that are generated from the site. Access is safe, and we say the 30-metre frontage to the property allows the 3 crossovers and for things like bins and other things to be adequately managed. I would point out to the councillors that there was only 2 objections received to this application. I note comments before about the number of objections is not important, but I reject the submissions made by Mr Perry that all of Margaret Street is against this proposal, because there's only 2 objections and no immediately adjoining residents have objected. And I note that the resident of number 19 was not an objector, although it was noted he was acting on his behalf tonight. I note some of the submissions you heard from Mr Perry, there were submissions made to you that are really a view of that particular gentleman about what's happening in the area, and that's fine to have his opinion, but the planning scheme allows this development. The planning scheme sets out the requirements that applicants need to meet, and where applicants meet those requirements and exceed those requirements in this particular case, we say that the proposal should be supported. We say this is an appropriate development, and we say that the officer's recommendation should be adopted by council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Gray. Are there any questions of the applicant before he sits down?
Thanks, Andrew, for your presentation, and thanks, Mr Perry, for your objection. I'm just wondering the same questions. Is there any water being caught on the site in water tanks?
There's rainwater tanks in the rear open spaces provided.
Yeah, and do you know what the idea of that water is to be used for? Just the gardens, perhaps?
Generally for the gardens, yes.
Yep. Any solar panels on the development?
There's no solar panels, but I'm instructed by my client, and it's also a part of the officer recommendation, that he would be happy to accept a condition about solar panels. It's generally, it's a general condition asking for further ESD initiatives, but my client has advised me earlier that he'd be prepared to have solar panels included on the
development, yeah.
Yes.
And any solar hot water on the development?
Well, that could be, if the solar panels are included, there could be a solar hot water service available in that way. So that's certainly
and the last question, by my calculations, between 12 and 14 split system air conditioners on the development. Do you happen to know if can you confirm that for me?
Look, I think, yes, again, I think there would be split systems provided. I think that's particularly in the upper level bedrooms and in the living area, certainly. But look, my instructions are that there will be split systems provided.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Abood, and Councillor Martin has some questions as well.
Yeah, following on, very similar to what Councillor Abood was saying, I just happen to have noticed that some of the clauses for environmentally sustainable development, given that the NABERS rating, energy rating, minimum of 6.5 star, I noticed this development doesn't meet that. Are you prepared to amend the development to meet that minimum 6.5 star rating?
In terms of the officer's recommendation, which is to increase the level of provision, look, I'll have to get instructions on that, Councillor. I mean, if you can let me speak to my client for a moment, I can respond to that. I can't really provide that advice on the run if you're happy for me to do that.
Certainly, and we're going to confer about the wording of the condition as well.
Yes.
So yes,
Thank
please
you.
do that.
Point of order, Chair. Have we adjourned or?
No, we were just waiting for the applicant to confirm with the client, and we're
Oh,
just
okay.
looking at some wording for the motion as well, for some of the proposed motions. And I'm going to now ask the applicant to provide a response.
Yes, Madam Chair, we have, I have conferred and that is acceptable to my client.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions of the applicant from councillors? No, thank you very much. You may be seated.
Thank you very much.
Are there any further questions of councillors to officers? No. I'll ask then for, is there a motion on the table? Councillor Farnley.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that a refusal to grant planning permit be issued for the construction of 6 dwellings at 3032 Margaret Street, Fawkner. I have a seconder.
Can you speak to it? Certainly. So Councillor Bolton has seconded it.
Thank you, councillors.
Councillor Farnley, might I just ask you to quickly summarise the grounds of refusal
Sure.
for the benefit of the gallery who wouldn't have seen the alternative, and then maybe speak to the why you've proposed the
Sure,
alternative.
okay. So the reason that I am refusing, along with Councillor Bolton's support, this particular development is that it fails to comply with neighbourhood character, it fails to comply with car and bike parking and vehicle access, it fails to comply with neighbourhood character objectives and landscaping objectives, specifically around the fact that there is not sufficient landscaping and tree planting opportunities at the ground level. If you look at the Unit 1 and Unit 6, it's actually adjoining the neighbours, so there's no landscaping opportunities on the side. There are 3 entry points to this property, so any guest would have to park potentially at Mr Perry's house across the road because there's not enough space at the front. It doesn't meet ESD standards. It also doesn't meet some of the open space and lighting objectives, and it fails to really give me any confidence that vehicles will be able to exit the site in a forward manner, which means it puts pedestrian access walking across the front at risk when vehicles are reversing about 10 metres back onto the street.
Thank you very much, Councillor Farnley. Councillor Bolton, do you wish to add anything?
So do I speak to it now?
Oh, so I thought you'd.
I'm
listed.
summarising it for you.
Okay, please speak to it.
And now I'll speak to it. All right. So, councillors, residents are more than not in favour of this type of development in the area. I mean, this is a stake in the ground moment for us. The reason why every councillor agreed that we should all be on the urban planning committee is that the number 1, 2 or 3 issue is the overdevelopment that's going on in our neighbourhood areas of Moreland. So the question really is what are we going to do about it? For me, this really sets the benchmark for development in Fawkner. We know that really Fawkner was built by the first generation of settlers in the 50s and 60s. My grandma, seems like Joe Perry's parents, they moved into Fawkner, they built their family home there, and as time goes by, they're starting to pass away. And what's going to happen to all the homes in Fawkner moving forward? This really is a benchmark moment for me. Do those properties now get subdivided to 3 or 4, and does the suburb of Fawkner become parts of Oak Park and Glenroy, where you can't actually drive home and find a park on the road, or your neighbours can't come comfortably and visit you? It's difficult. It's not the suburb that people want to move into. Now, there's a couple of points here. Firstly, this entire site is 1,147 square metres. Now, if you divide that by 6, Councillor Martin, that's 191 square metres per unit. That's less than 250 square metres that I think is a reasonable amount that you and I have discussed in the past as to what should be acceptable for units north of Bell Street. 191 square metres per unit, less than 250 square metres per unit. It doesn't meet ESD standards. I have no confidence that the cars going into the back 2 garages are going to honestly do a 3 or 4 or 5 point turn and get out of that driveway in a safe manner. They will be reversing, which then introduces risks to pedestrians walking past on Margaret Street. I've no confidence that spare car park that's used is supposed to be a shared car park, which is right on the window of I believe it's a second unit, is going to actually be used as a shared car park. It seems like it's almost designated for that second unit, which then means guests would realistically be parking on the street. You look at the setbacks on the sides, it's actually adjoining the land next door. It's adjoining the land next door. Now, if we're talking about widening the garages to make sure that it's a safe way so cars can do a point turn, well, where in the back units are you going to widen it any further? Is it a small adjustment? If it's a small adjustment, it already looks like it's impossible to do a 3-point turn. There's a lot of concerns with this particular development. It's too big. I think people in Fawkner are comfortable with the fact that you keep the home, you subdivide, you build something in the back. That's an appropriate response to development. This particular one is an overdevelopment.
Thank you, Councillor Farnley. Councillor Bolton, do you wish to add anything?
I'd just speak very briefly. I mean, probably on the side of this scale, I'd be happy to see a unit development with maybe a couple of units less than what's being fitted onto this block. Obviously, you do need to have a mix of different kinds of housing in an area. Standalone houses, small and some smaller units. But I guess my main reasons for opposing this and supporting the alternative resolution of refusal is one on neighbourhood character grounds, one on secondly on size of apartments, not necessarily in this order, and also I do have concerns about vehicles having to reverse out such a long distance to get out of the site, and feeling that the development takes up too much of the site, and so that there is inadequate space, open space on the site.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Is there a councillor who wishes to speak against this resolution? Councillor Kavanagh.
I want to speak against the resolution, and I foreshadow that if this is unsuccessful, I'll be moving the officer recommendation. The reason I'm speaking against the resolution is on a number of points. Number one, this is not in the neighbourhood residential zone. All right, this is not neighbourhood residential. This is general residential zone. When we went to the Minister asking for 250 square metres for certain properties, that was for neighbourhood residential zone, of which around 65% of Moreland is in that zone. This is in the general zone. It's in a general zone because it's 96 metres east of Sydney Road. It's well serviced by public transport, very close to Gowrie Station. The other thing we've got to remember with this application is that it is a double block. So we're looking at, if we were to think of each of them as separate, we're looking at 2 double-storey and 1 single-storey in the backyard. I think that's acceptable. I would almost think it's acceptable in neighbourhood zone, but I certainly think it's acceptable in general residential zone. And that's my reasons that I'll be voting against the refusal, and if it's unsuccessful, I'll be looking for approval.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanagh. Are there any councillors that wish to speak further to this item? Councillor Riley.
Thank you. Yes, I stand to speak against the proposal. Many of the issues that have been raised by this proposal have been addressed by officers in the report and in the foreshadowed motion that Councillor Kavanagh has mentioned, particularly because this is a general residential zone. Many of those concerns I don't have to take issue with. I mean, my personal belief would be to have far fewer cars on this site. However, I do believe the officers have explained themselves in terms of the turning circles. There are lines drawn on here. Whether people wish to believe the work that council officers have done or not is another issue, but I tend to trust that calculation and that work. So for this reason, I'll be supporting the motion, the foreshadowed motion.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Any further comment from councillors on Councillor Farnley's motion? No? In that case, I'll put that to the vote.
Close the debate.
He's got right to refute.
Would like to close the debate?
Yeah, I just, with respect to Councillor Kavanagh, we just had a proposal put forward regarding 4 units on 1 block, and that was in a neighbourhood residential zone and was still voted to provide a permit. So I'm not sure, even if this was in neighbourhood residential zone, if you would vote differently. So I just wanted to make that point, given that, you said it's because it's in a general residential zone, but we had one that was 4 units on a neighbourhood residential zone and you still gave the permit. So would you have voted differently if it was in that neighbourhood residential? questionable. I hope councillors will join me in. I think we've got here an objector in Joe Perry tonight, a very experienced campaigner, works in public relations. What we did with 14 Irvine Crescent in Brunswick is we backed the residents to go to VCAT and defend their case. We thought that was an overdevelopment for that particular site. We backed even though the council officers said it's fine, that we should grant the permit, we backed the residents in, and they've now gone to VCAT and hopefully they're going to present their case. We have a very experienced campaigner, Mr. Perry here, that's objecting to this. He works in public relations. He's already starting a Fawkner Residents action group. I believe if we can back him in to VCAT, he will run a case very successfully.
Thank you, Councillor Farnley. Since it was the close of the debate, I'm now going to put Councillor Farnley's motion to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that lost. Councillor Kavanagh?
Yeah, I move the officer recommendation on pages. Sorry, I've just lost my page. Here we go. Page 24, and if I have a seconder, I'll speak to it.
Is there a seconder to Councillor Kavanagh's motion? Do you wish to amend it? You won't be able to.
No. So it's
Okay, Councillor Martin is seconding it. Councillor Kavanagh, do you wish to speak to it?
Just to say that I do think that, as I mentioned before about the zoning, therefore I'm supportive of it. Regarding the other matter, yes, it didn't hit the 250 square metres, but it was about 30 square metres larger in each of the areas was about 30 square metres larger. It almost went to about 220 square or 215 square metres. But anyway, this goes to 191. 191 would be, in my view, pushing the envelope in a neighbourhood residential zone, but in a general residential zone, I think it's acceptable. We've been through this zoning is relatively new. About 3 or 4 years ago, council went out with this zoning. We did a lot of work at that point, going through all the mapping, etc., as to which areas we did want. We managed to protect a lot of the area of Fawkner and those other areas which have had overdevelopment. I accept what Councillor Farley says there, particularly in Oak Park and Glenroy, though many of those applications that were successful under the previous zoning wouldn't have been acceptable under this zoning, since we've had the neighbourhood residential zones in place.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Martin, do you wish to speak to this item? No. Councillors who wish to speak to this item. Councillor Aboud?
Okay, so I feel kind of a bit uncomfortable about voting against Councillor Farnley's amendment, but what I'm grappling with is what I mentioned before, which is development on a whole. We have a massively growing population. We're experiencing a lot of the older parts of the community. There is, in Moreland, we have a baby boom, and we also have a growing number of elderly citizens in the municipality. So what we need to do is we need to cater to both of those voices, okay? So we need to acknowledge that, sure, there might have been only 2 objections because maybe the people who wanted to object didn't have the means to object. They don't sit in front of computers like some of the rest of us do. They don't have phones with internet connections and email and everything in their hands. And I want to acknowledge that. But I think it's also very important, and especially because of my own personal beliefs, that we embrace a level of development in parts of the city. So I know that some of the councillors at this table think all of that development should be happening in the south end of the city, and I don't agree with that. I think that if you're within 100 metres of a train station, then there's an opportunity for you to rent a place, commute to the city, and you don't even need to own a car, which is what I'm aiming for, okay? So for me, this development, and I'm sorry to have to say this to you, and I feel kind of uncomfortable about voting against the refusal, but I think that this kind of development is closer to the kind of development we need to embrace than some of the stuff we have to say no to. I really would like to say to the developers and the owners of the property that you've got an opportunity to really shine. You've got an opportunity to embrace some new technologies, to make life for the people who are going to be renting this property from you or maybe buying it from you, to live a sustainable life with lowered electricity bills, with great technology so that their
Thank you, Councillor Abood. Are there any further speakers to this item? Councillor Riley?
Yes, I just wanted to reassure people who haven't seen or read the detail on this that the issues that are covered in this proposal regarding the landscaping, the trees and so on, and the 6.5 star rating has already been addressed, which was discussed with the proponent earlier. Those issues have been already addressed by officers. So, and I would just like to concur with my Councillor Abood's comments that we just don't need to have standard applications. We're actually looking for applications that rise above that and actually provide much better housing for the future, which are going to meet our needs, not only in the current climate conditions that we're dealing with, but how that's going to prevail in the future. So it's really important that we actually do have housing that can actually withstand the different climate that we're about to deal with and the types of severe storms that we're also dealing with. So I believe a lot of those issues have been addressed in the proposal, and I'm supporting that.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Are there any further comments? I might say a few words. I'll just want to speak really briefly. I too will support Councillor Kavanagh's motion. This is another tricky one, and particularly in an area that's starting to see a bit more development, and I totally heed that it's concerning, and I want to thank Mr. Perry for your very eloquent presentation, and it's really important that we know the issues and how people are experiencing that change. One of the tricky things in this area is that it is zone general residential and not neighbourhood residential zones. This was a package that we essentially inherited from the state government, who said you've got to rezone your complete municipality into these 3 new zones. Perhaps if we got to design the residential zones, we would have done it very, very differently. But at that time, we had to put a package up, and for ministerial approval, or everything would have been general residential zone. So we had to say some parts neighbourhood residential, but we also had to then say some was residential growth and some general residential. And if we hadn't put any in general residential, the whole package would have come down, and we would have got just general residential across every area, even in the areas that are the most locked down, neighbourhood character areas. So granted, this has been an area that hasn't seen a lot of development, but the zoning does mean that it is going to see a little bit more development. And one of the things that we're really mindful of, as my fellow councillors have spoken about, is really trying to get a better quality outcome. It's really tricky with the planning laws that we have at the moment. They're often not strong enough for us to get good development outcomes. But this one has been assessed by our officers. There's been a number of conditions that are imposed on it to get a better development outcome. Granted, though, it doesn't satisfy the concerns you've raised, and it's something we're going to have to think very seriously about as we see more applications coming up in the northern parts of the municipality. But the reason I'm supporting is because it is in general residential zone, and theoretically they could actually get more onto this site than they're proposing. And sometimes we have to look at it from that perspective as well. So I just want to thank you for your presentation and for representing the interests of your community, and we look forward to working with you and making sure that we get better development outcomes. If there's no further speakers, I'll put Councillor Kavanagh's motion to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried. I'll now turn to the officer to outline the next steps.
The committee has resolved to approve the application subject to the conditions set out in tonight's agenda. A copy of the decision will be sent to the applicant and objectors. The objectors will have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT, and the applicant will have 60 days in which to lodge an appeal against conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all those who attended for that item. We're now moving on to our next application, which is DD 3117, 1 Davison Street, Brunswick. And I'll just give the officers a moment to reposition. I'll turn to the officer now to present the officer report on 1 Davison Street.
Thank you, councillors.
The application at 1 Davison Street proposes the construction of 3 double-storey dwellings on a block of approximately 367 square metres. The site currently contains a single-storey rendered dwelling, likely constructed in the early part of the 20th century. The site has rear and side laneway access there, which you can see on the image to the right, and also on those 2 images there. Adjacent the site is number 3 Davison Street, which is a very similar type of dwelling. It does have a carport which abuts the common boundary with the subject site. Diagonally opposite the site is number 2A Davison Street, which was constructed in the late 1990s. It is a double-storey rendered brick building. The remainder of Davison Street is relatively low scale, generally one-storey dwellings, generally of the Victorian or Edwardian era. Front setbacks vary between 4 and 5 metres, generally as normal. Showing another couple of images there of the street. The proposal is for 3 dwellings, each with 2 bedrooms and 1 car space, accessed from the side laneway, maximum height of just under 7 metres. The ground level courtyards, vehicle access from the side laneway, with predominantly brick used as materials. The ground floor there shows some open plan living areas at ground floor, car space and a courtyard along the northern boundary. First floor is 2 bedrooms, a couple of bathrooms and a lounge area. North and south elevations, the side view, the bottom image there showing what would abut the neighbour, while the top image is what would abut the laneway. East elevation, which is Davison Street, showing the approximate location of the development within the immediate surrounds. The application was advertised and 1 objection was received from the property directly to the north. The key issues raised in those objections are listed at the bottom of the screen there, generally around non-compliances with Res Code, as well as some building matters as well. It is recommended that the application be refused on the grounds set out on the slide there. Council officers acknowledge that this development does display quite high environmentally sustainable design initiatives. However, we are recommending refusal based on those grounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Officer. Is there an objector who wishes to speak to this item first? Yes, please come forward.
Good evening and pleased to meet. My name is John Kirapuris. I live at number 3 Davison Street in Brunswick. I have objected to the proposal of the 3 dwellings on the next door site. One of them is, which are all written down, insufficient street setbacks. So the houses or the dwellings are proposed to be too far forward from the whole street. So on average, like I said, it's about 4 to 5 metres. This is going to go forward than that, about 2 metres, or 2 metres plus more forward than what they should be. Second that I put down was overlooking. I've got 3 balconies facing our side. So even though they're 1.7 high, they've got screens and all that, you can still look over. We've got laser light, which doesn't hide anything, so you can still see into our backyard. The other thing I put down was traffic and parking. When we had the meeting a couple of weeks ago, or about a month ago, the councillors came down and it was proven that we had no parking in our street. So there was only 1 car park, which was available when I got there at 4 o'clock. And this is what happens every day. So we struggle to find car park in your own house, in the front of your street, where even last week I had to park on Hope Street, which is further down than what we are. The other thing I put down was loss of daylight. So I'd taken a photo which I submitted in my objection at 12 o'clock on a Saturday on a very sunny day. If the dwellings do go ahead, light transmission to that window, it's going to be hard, or even a third of what it is. So it's going to be dark. I'm not saying that it's going to be a shadow, it's just going to be not enough light transmission going into the rooms. The other thing was coverage, which was too far, I think, to the boundary of our house. So the higher it is, the more further out it's supposed to go. And the other thing I had put down was, if they do start, what are the guarantees about my property not having any damage? That was it.
That's the end of your
So
objection.
nice and quick.
Thank you very much, and we'll attempt to address some of the questions that you've raised in your objection through the debate as well. Thank you very much. Are there any further objectors who wish to speak? There's only one objector to this one. Is there a representative of the applicant who wishes to speak? Please come forward. You have a presentation?
Can I go to the mouse, Ashley? Is that cool?
And, yeah.
Thanks, man. Is that going to full screen? There we go. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, John, and thanks, Ashley, and Chair and councillors. I thought this evening we'd respond specifically to the 6 areas of Section 55 that had been specifically raised by council officers in their report. We thought that would be the best way to understand the level of thought that's gone into our proposal and the level of detailed thinking that sometimes ResCode doesn't necessarily allow for a clear communication of. So to begin with, and probably uniquely, definitely for tonight, but more broadly, the majority of applications that come before you, the 3 townhouses that we propose to build at 1 Davison Street, we propose to be occupied by each of the 3 couples, myself being one, myself and Katya, Peter and Sarah, and Chris and Miranda. So the essence of this development is non-speculative, and it is very much geared towards building homes for I guess a younger generation to live within what is increasingly a kind of a suburb lacking in affordability. So just jumping in, this is our response, I guess, to the issues raised. So the first issue raised was the street setback. Council officers referring to ResCode and requesting that setback be 5.4 metres or equal to our neighbour to the north. The reasoning behind our proposed front setback, we've essentially drawn a line between the corner of our neighbour's building to the north and the corner of the building that's built hard up against both its northern and eastern boundary. We've taken the intersection of that point and the setback equals 2.9 metres. Now, if we look more broadly along Davison Street, we've highlighted 10 properties within a stone's throw of our property that have a front setback less than 2.9 metres. The property at 8 Davison Street there has a front setback of 1.65 metres. And then the 2 properties to our south obviously built 0 plot line, and the property at 2A Davison Street is built 0 plot line over 2 levels. On that basis, we contend that, despite the specifics of ResCode, that pretty clearly the existing neighbourhood context calls for support for a front setback in the order of what is proposed. It's worthy of noting. The second issue raised by council officers in their report referred to site coverage. What we'd like to highlight, it was raised in the officers' report that we're proposing a 67% site coverage. Now, the building area that we're proposing is 212.5 square metres. Now, of the 365 square metre site, that represents 58% site coverage. That's under the required 60% site coverage of the ResCode standard. The pedestrian path that you see highlighted in pink is 31.7 square metres. That represents 9%. So the 58 plus the 9 get us up to our 67. I'd just like to raise that as a point. I'd like to then move on to the existing condition. The existing landscape area on site is 35 square metres or 10% of the site area. There's a single lemon tree in the backyard and all of the other uncovered spaces on site are concreted. Our proposal on the right proposes 120 square metres of landscaped area or 33% of the site area. Now that's important because recently changes to the Victorian planning scheme have particular and within the neighbourhood residential zone have stated that sites under 400 square metres do not have a minimum garden area requirement. Our proposal provides 33% of garden area. Under the changes to the new planning scheme, lots between 501 to 650 square metres are required to provide 30% garden area requirement. Lots over 650 square metres are required to provide 35%, and yet here we are on a 365 square metre block of land in urban southern Brunswick, providing 33% garden area. I think that's particularly noteworthy, and it really does speak to one of the key reasons why we bought this site, and that is that we have the laneway interface to our south and to the west, which allows us to pull our building form back against that laneway and have the majority of our circulation running along that existing infrastructure in order to then increase the garden area of our site. The next issue that was raised is the issue of private open space.
I'm just conscious of time, so if you can keep
yeah,
moving
sorry,
through,
there's two more that I can get through quickly. The private open space objective. So council officers have raised issue with our private open space allocation being under 40 square metres. Townhouse 1 provides 30.4, Townhouse 2 31.3 and Townhouse 3 31.4. Importantly, our proposal seeks to make communal use of our front yard. Our front yard size is 28 square metres. Why are we doing that? We're doing that because we see the front yard as being a critical opportunity to bring each of the occupants of the three townhouses together to connect with each other, but also to connect more broadly with the local community. And we see that as being a really innovative measure for this kind of development in Brunswick. Now, if we take that 28 square metres and we divide it by 3, it equals 9.6. Now, if I add that area to the private open space of each of the townhouses, it gets us up to our 40. Now, I'd like to make that point because as we increase density within our neighbourhoods, we need to use land more efficiently, we need to be smarter with our land, and we need to think how we can use our land to strengthen the bonds of community. And we think we've got something with this proposal that can really be encouraged to achieve that. Again, not necessarily supported by the specifics of Res Code. The second last issue is that of solar access to open space that is provided within our development. Council officers have referred to the building height of our building to the north being 4.1 metres. We've double-checked that since the council officers' report was issued, and we've double-checked the site survey that was provided to officers, and we confirm that the height of that building is actually 3.59 metres, not 4.1 metres. Now that's close to a metre error, and in the councillor's report they referred to scaling from drawings. There was no need to scale. RLs were provided, and that information was easily ascertainable. Now, based on council officer logic, we would have to move our northern building line back 1.2 metres to meet Res Code. Based on our review of the facts, we would need to bring the northern building line of our building back only 700 millimetres to meet the Res Code standard. Our objective in designing our building has been to build the most environmentally friendly building we can build. We're aiming for a 7.5 star outcome. One of the key components of aiming for building efficiency is to minimise the amount of solar heat gain and heat loss. One of the key areas through which that occurs is through glazing. To a degree, our proposal is at odds with increasing solar access into the northern backyard areas. It limits our ability to achieve the efficiencies that we're trying to achieve. That being said, the next issue that was raised is storage. One more.
Yep, sure.
The storage, it's calculated that we're providing 3.2 cubic metres of storage per townhouse. We put forward that our floor to ceiling height within the garage is 3 metres, well in excess of standard ceiling heights. If we were to take the 300 millimetre zone for the entire area of each of the garage zones, which is 25 square metres, and times that by 300 millimetres, that's 7.5 cubic metres. And that's a requirement that could be very easily met through a design outcome and could be conditioned as part of tonight's proceedings as something that we could easily accommodate. The final issue raised was that of design detail objective. Council officers commented that the architectural style would not integrate with the built form, scale, siting and appearance of the surrounding context, particularly when viewed from Davison Street streetscape. Compliance with this objective could not be conditioned as it is considered a key flaw with the current design. I have to respectfully disagree with that assessment. This is the existing condition. This is our proposed condition. We've put together a design application with a nationally recognised young architectural practice. This architectural practice has based themselves in Brunswick. Our company, our sustainability consultancy, has too based itself in Brunswick. We're working at a national scale on some of the leading environmentally kind of ambitious projects of varying scales, and we would contend that that we've put forward the best possible application we can, responsible in the immediate context that this site finds itself, and we've also attempted to put forward a proposal that seeks to deal with how we can start to make better use of our land resource.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much for that presentation. Before we sit down, I might just ask if there's any questions from councillors for the applicant. Councillor Abood.
Same questions. How are you heating your hot water? Solar hot water?
There's actually a heat pump solution. So our aim is to be is not to use renewables in operation. So we're not providing gas. So we're 100% electric. We take all our electricity off solar panels from the roof. We use batteries to store that power, and then we use heat pump technology, which is incredibly efficient.
So that was a yes to the solar panels then, and catching water on the site?
Catch water store.
Yeah. There's 2, 4, 6 bedrooms upstairs, so 6 split system air conditioners?
No air conditioning. We don't need it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abood. Any further questions from councillors? So we've got Councillor Riley, Martin and Kavanagh. Councillor Riley first.
Yes, there's a lot about this application that I like in terms of the ESG provisions. I'm just wondering, when did you submit the proposal? Because there's a lot of detail and a lot of numbers you've hit us with tonight, which concerns me.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why they haven't been resolved with officers. That's my first question. My second question is, you haven't addressed the issue of the rear yard and the fact that the rear yards in this street, the neighbourhood character is mostly open backyards, and why you're proposing a double storey in the rear, at the rear of this site.
Sure. We submitted this application in November last year, in November 2016. So a 3 townhouse application now has been in process for close to 6 months.
In terms of the numbers, the question about the numbers and the alternative numbers that you've provided us with tonight, and whether they've been disputed with the officers previously. Have you tabled them with the officers previously? Or?
We had the opportunity to review a detailed planning officer assessment as of Friday evening last week. So a detailed assessment in consideration of the more detailed minutiae of some of the res code related non-compliance was not provided to us in detail until we saw the officer's report on Friday.
Online?
On the internet?
On the internet.
On the internet, we downloaded it. We were not provided with a copy of the officer's report prior to that.
Okay, thank you. And are your questions answered, Councillor Riley?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't talk to this issue because I was trying to get through a fair bit else. we contend that the neighbourhood character of this specific site context is actually green and leafy. Immediately to our south, behind our proposal, construction is underway. A 3-level project is underway. Concrete footings were poured as early as last Saturday, we were told by one of our neighbours to the south, who, by the way, is supportive of our application.
Could you please see that on the diagram, like whereabouts that application is? We've asked about this.
On Hope Street.
Loaded.
Councillor
It's
Tapanos?
on Hope Street.
Here we go. So that hole in the ground there.
Oh, sorry, the south part. Yes, apologies. All right.
So footings were dug and
All right, sorry,
blinding was
apologise.
poured on
Aware
Saturday
of that,
in
that's
that
right.
hole. So
Yep.
that's a 3-level form immediately to our south. The other important thing to note about this site is it bookends. So we have a laneway to our south, and we have a laneway separating our block and the block to our west. If you go about 75 metres to the north along the laneway to the opposite bookend, there are 2 townhouse projects with rear 2-storey developments built in their backyard. So at the opposite bookend of our proposed location, we have another location where there are multi-storey developments built in the rear yard. And I guess that comes down to one of our other key points is that were we 1 block further north, this wouldn't be appropriate. But we're not, and we're at a bookend to a laneway with 2 laneway frontages and a street frontage, with a 3-level building being built to our south, and two forms to our southeast that are built hard edge, and one of those being double-storey hard edge. So we would pretty vehemently contend that this is not an example of a green leafy rear backyard condition.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, thank you.
I had 2 brief questions. The first one being the community garden at the front. How is the ownership worked out on that? Is it attached to the front property? And how do you ensure that if you sell that front property that it remains a community garden? That's my first question.
Yep.
And the second question I had was if you could just briefly touch on the coverage again, going from the 58% to the 67%. I'm sorry, I think I might have missed that one again.
If I address your second question first, so the yellow area is our built area, which is covered by roof. And this pink area is a pedestrian pathway that's been provided by us to ensure that pedestrian traffic doesn't occur on the laneway. So we can create a split between vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic. So 58% of total site coverage equates to the yellow area, and then 9% of the total site area equates to the pink area. So you add those 2 up, you get 60.
So along the lines of the community garden aspect, if you were to sell that front property, somebody wanted to dig up that path at the front, how do you prevent that from sort of happening?
No. So one of the key ideas that we'll propose to Council Subdivision Officer, subject to our application being successful, is that that front yard is actually individually titled to each tenancy. Very similar to in an apartment project where you might create a separate title for a car park that is not attached to the actual title of the apartment. Now, the reason we're doing that is to ensure that ownership stays with each of the individual titles. There's also other reasons why we're proposing to manage the shared space in that way, and that is not to place the cost burden of having an owners corporation and the associated insurances, which have a minimum cost, which is circa $1,000 a year. So we reduce the cost and the burden of having an owners corporation to manage that front lot. We create individual titles that are owned into perpetuity and connected to each of the other titles. It also then provides freedom of use, which I think is one of the fundamental aspects of how we can create successful communal space, in that, I have my block, someone else has their block, and if we choose not to collaborate, we don't have to. But I think sometimes when we remove the committee aspect of these relationships, we find that collaboration is slightly easier sometimes.
Thank you. Is it all your questions, Councillor Martin? Councillor Kavanagh.
Just a boundary wall on the rear of dwelling 3. Am I correct that it's a maximum height of 7.1 metres and 3.5 metres greater than the standard? I don't think did you speak to that at all? Did I miss that bit?
the council officers in their report accepted that as being appropriate, given
Yes.
that that was adjacent to that laneway interface.
All right, okay, thank you.
Could I ask a question? With the laneway, the 31.7 metres, is that a permeable surface? Is that actually considered a permeable space, or is that a concrete?
I guess in our assessment, it's not. Our landscape plan proposes that is it's a bluestone. It's a different treatment of bluestone to contrast it from the laneway, so that we don't have cars driving on it, and it's delineated with a strip of LED lighting. So it's different in treatment to the laneway, but it's a similar robust material to the laneway.
All right. Councillor Kavanagh?
And just the pink is in your ownership, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Entirely.
Any further questions from councillors? If not, I'm going to propose a 5-minute adjournment just for us to deliberate on some of the information you provided. So just bear with us. Thank you.
Sorry, you've got to put that to the vote.
No, adjournment. I can call an adjournment from the chair. Can you look at the local law?
I think you can.
Hi, I'm Helen Davidson, Mayor of Moreland. I'm standing in Glenroy where there were meant to be noise walls, as promised by Daniel Andrews in the 2014 state election campaign. Some of the noise walls have been built, but much of Glenroy has been forgotten. I wonder how the residents here slept.